Let's make a super easy bookmark perfect for spring. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are going to be making a bookmark. Now this can either be reversible, how I did, using two different colors, or you can do it all using the exact same fabric. For your fabric, you're going to want some sort of cotton, specifically maybe a quilting cotton. Really any woven fabric will do. As you can see with my bookmark, it's a little sturdier as I used interfacing on the inside. That's how we're going to give it kind of that structure. So for your bookmark as well, you are going to want some interfacing. Now I used fusible interfacing, so one side kind of has like some rough bubble type feeling and the other side is smooth. You're going to be cutting out two pieces from this interfacing. You could use fusible. If you have sew-in interfacing, you could use that as well. I just find fusible a little easier. Next, you're going to want some ribbon. I used this like silky ribbon. It was about 3/8 of an inch or so. I found it to be really helpful. Then you want your pins, your scissors. We're going to be using a sewing machine. And once you have all the supplies collected, we can start on making our bookmark. Now there is an Etsy pattern for this with the link in my description box, and if you use code bookmark23 you can get 30% off in case it's easier for you to see everything written out in steps. So with that said, let's get started. So you're going to take your fabric. If you're using two different colors of fabric, so one for the front and one for the back of your bookmark, you're going to want to lay your fabric out into a single layer. If you are using the exact same fabric for both the front and the back, you could have this doubled so that you'd be able to cut out those two pieces at once. So for the sizing in the pattern on Etsy, you'll see I have 3 different sizes you could go with. I'm going to make the larger bookmark, so that's going to be 8 inches by 4 inches, so you can just use your scissors to cut out that rectangular dimension. Now if you want to make this smaller or narrower, you could definitely do that as well. Also, if you had a rotary cutter, you could definitely use that instead of scissors. Once you have the one piece, you will then cut the next one if you're using 2 different fabrics. Otherwise, you probably already have both of your pieces of fabrics ready to go. Now with that, we're going to have to cut out our interfacing. Very similar process. We're going to want 2 pieces of our interfacing. So I have my interfacing, as you can see, folded, so it's doubled, and then I'm just going to use that piece of fabric that I cut earlier as my guide for how big the interfacing pieces should be. Now with the interfacing, as you see, what I'm going to start to do is I'm actually going to cut it slightly smaller than my fabric. This is because I'm using fusible interfacing, so I'm going to have to use my iron to attach it to my fabric, and it's actually a little easier if it's smaller. That way you don't worry about the interfacing actually getting onto your iron. You don't have any of that stickiness. It just makes things a little nicer and easier to work with. So I cut this out slightly smaller than what my fabric would be. For my dimensions, maybe it's around 7.5 by 3.5, but I didn't actually measure it. I just cut it out so that it's not exactly the same length and width. Now for my ribbon, I just cut out an 8-inch piece of ribbon. The ribbon is a really fun part of this, so if you want to have multiple pieces, you definitely could. You could also skip the ribbon entirely. It's totally up to you. It's more of a decoration, not a needed step. So now that I have all my pieces cut out, it is time to actually begin constructing the bookmark. So first step is I'm going to apply my interfacing to my fabric. So if that bumpy side, if you're using fusible interfacing, you want to attach that to the wrong side of your fabric. So you can see here that I have my interfacing, so this is the bumpy sides facing up. I have the wrong side of my fabric facing down, so they're together, and then I'm just going to press it with my iron. Now depending on the type of interfacing you got, I'm using a light to medium weight. You may have different instructions. Some interfacings call for steam, some just heat, so be sure to look at your manufacturer instructions. You'll then repeat this for the second side, having the bumpy side of your interfacing touching the wrong side of your fabric, pressing that all nice and flat and smooth, and as it cools down, you'll start to notice that your piece of fabric will get a little sturdier. Now we are going to match with right sides together, both the front and the back of the bookmark. So as you can see here, I have both of the right sides of my fabric are now matching. Everything's lined up really nicely, and it's now time to pin these. So I'm going to pin both of those long edges and then one of the short edges, and I'm going to take a seam all the way around those 3 edges, leaving one short edge completely open, and that's what we're going to be using to turn our bookmark. Now for sewing this, I just use a straight stitch. Be sure to back stitch so that you are holding that stitch and it is nice and secure. And then I just went all the way through sewing everything up on that one long edge. And then when I got to the corner, I did turn my fabric. So what this means is you put your needle down into your fabric, then you're going to lift your presser foot up, and then you are going to actually turn your fabric 90 degrees so that you get that nice angle, and then we will put the presser foot back down and continue sewing. If at any point the corner is a little hard to navigate, you can always just very slowly kind of push your fabric through, and that should help guide it over any bumps that are in the fabric. Then at the end, I'm going to backstitch again. When it is done, you can now clip those corners so that'll be easier to turn, as well as trim any of the edges if there's any extra fabric. You just want to make sure so that there isn't a lot of extra fabric that will cause bulk, so that when we turn this right side out, it will lay as flat and smooth as possible. Now when it comes time to turning, what you are going to do is you're going to find where that opening was and then very, very slowly push your fabric through. And why I say very slowly is sometimes, depending especially on what type of thread you're using, if it's a very tight fit, it may actually like snap or break the seam. So you just want to very carefully guide the fabric so that you're turning it right side out. And then when you get down to the edges, really pushing those through. You could definitely use a pen or a pencil to kind of help push the fabric and make sure you get that nice point. If you are someone who is struggling though to get that point, I use a very small pin and just kind of very carefully guide that fabric out a little bit at the corners so that it's a nice crisp point if I can get it. Sometimes if I'm starting to notice that the fabric's snagging, I will just stop, but if you can get it so that it's a little bit more pointed out, that can always help your seams look nice and crisp. Once you do that though, it will then be time for us to actually start to press all of this out one more time. So we're going to use our iron, fold everything so that it's nice and flat, and then we can start top stitching. So here I am just pressing out both the front and the back of my bookmark, making sure it lays nice and smoothly. And then what I'm going to do is at that edge that we still have open, I'm actually going to be folding these two edges in on each other. So around 1/2 inch or so, I'm just going to be pushing the edges and then folding it under so that I get this nice little pocket almost, and I will have no raw edges showing. And then I'm going to press this down as well so that I'm not able to see any of the raw edges, and I can make sure that it will hold in place while I go and pin it. So you're just going to press this down. Since you do have interfacing in it, it should be able to sort of stay before you actually pin it while you are pressing it. And then we're going to get pins, and then we will actually add our ribbon in here as well. And then we're just going to take one final seam all the way around, and our bookmark will be complete. So here is where my bookmark is right now. As I talked about, we're going to get our ribbon and we're going to put it somewhere in this opening. If you wanted more on an end, you could do that. If you wanted in the middle, really it doesn't matter where you put your ribbon. If you're using multiple pieces of ribbon, you could just put all three, however you'd like them, on your bookmark. So I'm just going to guide this in probably about 1/2 inch or so, and then I'm going to pin this in place. And then this is how I'm going to take that stitch all the way around my bookmark, and that will hold our ribbon in as well as close that opening and give it a nice consistent look all the way around. Now since this is top stitching, I did do it about 1/8 inch or so it's much closer to the edge than a normal seam allowance. And I'm just doing a straight stitch going all the way around, being cautious when I get to the corners. If I get any times where it gets stuck, just very carefully pushing my fabric through. And with this, it will really depend on what type of fabric you're using. If you used a very thick cotton and then you have that interfacing, as you can see here, for my needle, it did get a little stuck at that corner. So I had to lift the presser foot and then very slowly just guide my fabric under so that it kind of would get over that little hump almost in my fabric. And then I could just take that straight seam all the way down until I got to the next corner and then had to repeat the steps. You just really want to take your time though, and you will be able to get through all of those little bumps along your fabric, and you'll be able to get the top stitching complete. Once you get to the end, be sure to back stitch it as well as you did at the front, and this is what your bookmark will look like. So at this point, everything is almost done. All we need to do is trim off those little extra threads, and then depending on what type of ribbon you use, some ribbons can be known to fray, and if you have a ribbon that is like that, what you'll want to do is cut it at a diagonal, and this will help prevent it from fraying over time and just gives it a really nice clean look. So this is what your bookmark looks like. I hope you absolutely love it as much as I do. Remember, there is a pattern on my Etsy store for this. If you would like all these steps written out, use code bookmark23 to get 30% off. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.